Welcome to DTLT Today.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
How's it going?
Hi, everybody. We got a full chat. We're going to pay the
do.
chat some mind, so keep in mind that.
We are.
We have a full chat.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the chat, particularly. Big fans. We read all your chats.
Should we mention that we have a chat that we watch regularly during the show? Because we do. There's a chat underneath this video
Exactly.
that we watch regularly.
And it's quite full.
It is full right now. Hey, can I make a point that Luke Walter, who's at CUNY, who never watches our show either, compared, he said, are you going to, I was just chatting with him, and he said, are you going to go do that little Wayne's World thing you do?
Wow.
Yeah,
So
we're in the
bad.
DuPont basement.
Exactly. Wayne's World! Wayne's World!
It's fun.
Can we say that? Am I allowed to disclose that data?
I don't know. We might be shut down. They're going to send us a letter in 5 days.
I think we need to read what FERPA has to say about what we're allowed to say and what we're not allowed to say on the show.
That's right. And although we do have a mole in, we have Boone from CUNY in. So we
Yeah.
do have a CUNY mole in. We were just talking smack about Walter.
Good to know. So,
And we were actually, Boone, we've been following and talking about your kind of hysteria about SOPA. So we'll bring that up at some point.
that might need it. That might need its own episode.
It's the FERPA SOPA show.
All right. Let us go. What are we talking about today, Tim?
Well, we're talking about Georgia Tech, of course. So,
Yes.
Audrey Waters, hackeducation.com, had an article on this, but it pointed originally to what's the guy's name?
Mark
Help me
Guzdial,
out.
I
Mark
think, but I'm not
Guzdial.
sure I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah. but
Guzdial.
Anyway, Georgia Tech has this wiki installation, Swikis,
Yep.
that they do course content on there. They actually run some courses all through the wiki.
And
Similar.
It predates MediaWiki. It
Yeah.
predates the Wikipedia.
1997 it started. So, I mean, this is a groundbreaking area. Now, I will say, I was looking on the Google cache for it. It looks like computer science was using it a lot. It wasn't a campus-wide thing that was being used. But nevertheless, just in terms of historical content,
Exactly.
you've got courses happening in a system that existed in 1997.
And it looks like it's still existing in 1997. I mean, look,
That's true.
this isn't about the aesthetic of the
No.
system, right?
It's not. But anyway, so he posted that basically Georgia Tech has interpreted FERPA, which of course is help me out here, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974. And it's everybody in education knows what FERPA is because it always comes up anytime you're talking about any piece of software or system or service for students because it's for the protection of student data. And it always comes up. You've mentioned in a post that you did about this that it seems like anytime you talk about DS-106, there's like, how quickly will someone bring up FERPA? In the first
It's really
first
like,
or second
0 to 60,
question.
and the F word comes up. And we've even referred to it as the F word.
Yeah.
The
And-
5-letter F word.
Yeah, and it really does become that. And it's become such a thing that I don't even think people know what it means. They just feel compelled to say it. And they even say, I'm compelled to say this even though I don't want to say it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, then why say it? And you don't even know what FERPA means because no one does.
Well, that's the thing. It seems like it is so loose in its interpretation or not clear enough to where every agency and organization can sort of bend it to their will depending either on their misunderstanding of it or on what they want to interpret it as for other goals of theirs. If they don't want to use a piece of software, it's easy to say, well, I don't think FERPA allows this. So there's this gray area.
This is probably a violation of FERPA.
Right. So there's this gray area that it exists in. Georgia Tech decided that the Swiki software, or the way that it was being used, I should say, not the software itself, but the way that the professors were using this software was in violation of FERPA.
And I think the point that Luke Walter made in a comment in response to a post I wrote was basically like, it's not so much that I agree that, now UMW's found a solution and everyone owns their own data and rainbows and unicorns, but with the absolute step that it's seemingly Georgia Tech took to say, look, we're taking these all down.
Yeah.
And it was just this kind of sweeping idea that it's not something we can negotiate. There's not some sort of gray area. Let's have our lawyers look into it and think about this critically. But it was like, we are taking this down, temporarily, they said on the official
That's-
release, it does say temporarily, so we got to be clear there.
We'll put the link in the show notes for today, but Georgia Tech has an official release for this now, because before we were trying to find out if this was even true. We saw a blog post, but it didn't make mention back to actual Georgia Tech. But this is an official release saying temporary removal of past course websites.
Yeah.
Basically, I guess, pointing out that there are flaws. Here's what I find interesting about it, because they talk a little bit about their interpretation of FERPA and the reason
and
that
read
it's
that,
wrong.
because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, so it says the exposures identified by OIT, which is, I guess, their IT department, represent not just a few isolated incidents, but a pattern resulting from practices many of us follow in building and maintaining course websites. It's not simply a pattern in the College of Computing, which is who was using the wiki software, but all Georgia Tech colleges will have to deal with this issue. Simply put, FERPA prohibits the release of student names in connection with any particular classes in which they've been enrolled, and this connection can be either explicit or reasonably inferred. So they're basically saying, when you look at these wikis, you can see that student is in that class. And that is a violation.
That is a blanket violation according to them, which I think is really interesting. And this is a point that Mike Caulfield brings up, and it's one that I think no one has been talking about. A couple of things. FERPA makes no distinction between, right, and this is a really important point, revealing elements of the educational record to a student's classmates, revealing them to the greater web. There's no distinction. So does that mean if you have some information on campus that says a student is enrolled in a particular class, or a student has their name on an artwork, or has their name on some sort of theater production, which Noy's professor brought up, that we couldn't infer that? So does that make the fact that any kind of performing arts class is completely off limits?
Well, let's go even deeper.
It's crazy.
Well, and let's go even deeper with that, because the thing is, it's easy to point to this stuff when you're talking about online education. So it's easy, because of the online software, to be able to say, oh, well, that's not quite right, you shouldn't do that. But when you look in the real world, it's like, I can walk around this campus and I can reasonably infer which students are in which class just by using my eyeballs. So I can look in a classroom and say, oh, that person's in that class. Oh, Charlie's taking that class. Oh, okay, that's that. What can a student do to prevent that, and how do you meet those students' needs? Let's say if it's a valid need for FERPA that a student says, I don't want people to know I'm in this class. You're going to need to black out these windows. You're going to need to use shades or something. I'm going to need an escort to and from my class, because people can't know that I'm walking into a classroom and know that I'm actually in this class.
That's right.
At what point do you draw the line?
And I think there's good points brought up in the chat. And I don't want to cut you off, Andy, but I mean, the points are...
The chat is important.
Yeah.
We should talk about
we
the
don't
chat.
want to ignore the chat.
Don't ignore the chat.
We do love you. Is the fact is, do students have the option to enroll? And shouldn't it be the case that when a student has an issue and they make that clear, that we make, certain, qualifications, certain kind of, we make sure that they're able to kind of hide that data, or they have control over that data to some degree. The fact that it becomes blanket, that every student wants to hide this stuff, and hence doesn't give the other students choices. Like, what are all those students that wanted that stuff out there, that needed it out there for various reasons? We don't even consider them. Yeah. And so there's this weird kind of sensibility that 1%, right, that's having an issue or that has some problem, we can't make accommodations for them. We have to call the whole thing off. Yeah. This is the same thing, and that's both what BVMD and Dr. Garcia brought up. So I thought it was a good point. Andy.
No, you covered what I was talking about, and what it's it's the Web 2.0 stuff, and that was talked about as well, about how we do this by default on the web. We open ourselves up as much as we want to, and it also gets back to all the discussions about how free do we want to be. It's almost like the free market approach to your information, and people are going to deal with this in different ways. There was no such thing as online issues that we had to deal with when this law came about. It was about protecting kids from stalkers or people who were looking for kids in schools, to find out where they were. So they didn't want to associate, like Mike Caulfield talks about, artwork hanging in the hallway.
That's right.
So it was about people who were looking for certain people. It's another one of those, and fear is brought into this very quickly too. Yeah. It's another one of those blowing out of proportion the fear of, the online exposure that children have, especially, that gets blown out of proportion.
And it's clear that Mark Guzdial is being very kind of measured in his response. He is a Georgia Tech professor. He's a computer science professor. I mean, he lives his stuff. He's a regular blogger about the stuff that's happened in his department. It's clear that it's like, what the hell is going on? This is all the work we've done for close to 14 years.
Well,
right?
and let's be clear. I mean, Swicky's was very much, from the looks of what I can tell, was his baby. I mean, this would be similar to you talking about someone doing something to UMW blogs.
Well, it's why I reacted so quickly, and I think many other people, like Brian Lamb, had the disconnectivism kind of play on this, which I love, that psychedelic animated gif of someone holding a guy's leg by... I mean, but... The fact is you get scared because you realize 14 years down the line for them and their legal department just cut off a complete part of the ecosystem of that web and of the students' content and the student they created. That could happen tomorrow here.
Well,
based just on this,
with no debate and no discussion about it. Like, what are the legitimate uses of this?
Yeah,
that's just. And that's the default way of doing things these days.
A directive came from the dean basically saying, we've cut it down temporarily. We're looking into it with our legal team. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Now, the local, the courses for this semester were not taken down, just to be clear. It's not like students came in and said, oh, our work's gone. Only from previous semesters. This semester's work was stayed
That's
up.
what the letter from Georgia Tech said. Yeah.
It's interesting. All right. Yeah, it was hard to tell from the website what was running where in that regards. But the chat's talking a little bit about whether students can opt out or not. And one interesting point that Noy's professor was making, you kind of make as well, is he's talking about is that even right for a student to be able to opt out of certain things? Like, I mean, when you boil it down, are you going to allow a journalism student to say, I'm not publishing an article? Because I don't want my name associated with the work that I created. There's some legitimate problems with that argument in of itself. I'm not going to do a presentation in front of my classmates because I don't want my name associated with the work that I did. And
I won't do group work.
Right.
I won't do this. I won't do that because and then FERPA becomes this catch-all for everything. And Joe Murphy brings up a great point, as do several other people in the chat. It's like, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. How do we make this a communal discussion about, okay, what does it mean to create a kind of effective identity online? What does it mean to create a kind of some sort of pseudonym, right? What does it mean to frame? This is such an awesome occasion to think about what Web 2.0 affords us in all these different kind of ideas of controlling our data, maintaining our identity, reclaiming some of those ideas, right? Why aren't these questions coming out with Gmail?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's the question, and like,
Facebook.
I mean, this is like huge. Now, the whole other point is, do we push people now to say, you know what, don't even use UMW blogs. Get your own blog space wherever it is, and we'll figure out some sort of syndicated
That's sort of
aggregation.
what I was leaning
hub.
towards last night.
It's like,
tweet.
forget it. Like the universities are so screwed up, and their internecine schizophrenic attempt to make themselves irrelevant is working. And we just have to basically step out of that implosion and find another way, which to me is really sad. Yeah. It really is sad. I mean, as much as I want to say extra institutional, like, I want to believe that there's some hope that we can still be relevant.
And or the cockroaches that'll be left after the implosion.
And so then the question becomes, like, by doing that, are you implicit in encouraging students to violate FERPA in some way, and is that grounds for being fired? Like, are you putting your job on the line by encouraging your students to not use university resources because of that? I mean, again, it's like...
I couldn't imagine you wouldn't.
I think it's exposure. I think it's the university limiting their exposure to lawsuits.
It's all about lawsuits. It has nothing to do with teaching and learning. It has
nothing to do with actually protecting kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about covering your ass. I mean, it's the culture we live in right now. Now, I want to actually point to Ted Major. I don't know if you know Ted Major. He blogs at pedagogy.learningbusiness.net. Oh. He has a great post. What if Georgia Tech is right about wikis and FERPA? And this is kind of a provocative post, but he actually knows some of the history around this. He talks about the Supreme Court ruling of Gonzaga versus Doe, and he talks about basically the history of the FERPA ruling. And his kind of his assumption, and we'll link in the show notes, is basically like, we may be better off having students get their own space and manage their own space, because FERPA specifically talks about all this information being on institutional servers and managed and maintained by institutions. And that's what we do with UMW blogs. That's what Georgia Tech does with their Swiki. That's what UBC does with their setup. That's what the Commons, CUNY Academic Commons does. And, all of us who are doing this with Web 2.0 tools, particularly you, Boone, too, I mean, this is a question we have to ask now. Like, are we now in some kind of, terrible situation where the good we were trying to do is going to turn into a potential lawsuit for our universities, and they're going to turn on us and say, kill it. Done.
Well, and it's in many ways why we talked a little bit about the freakouts and other issues that happen. A lot of times, sometimes our ways around these laws are better than the original fear. We get around the copyright and the piracy issue. I mean, piracy, sites open up all the time. You can get stuff when you want it. Nothing actually goes. It just makes it a little bit harder in some cases, and issues like this as well. Maybe something better comes out of it because they have forced our hand to kind of make it better and have students have their own individual spaces to work on. So, I don't know.
Wouldn't it be nice, though, if our institutions use this as an opportunity to have these conversations and to talk about, okay, what does this mean about digital identity, the protection of student data, and the web? Yeah. Which in 1974 wasn't really a big thing. You know what I mean? Wasn't really on everybody's radar. No. And the possibility of, different notions of privacy.
They had just gotten done sending the first emails, I believe, at that time.
That's
so,
right.
2 years later.
Engelbart had just figured out the mouse, right?
yeah, exactly.
And my hope is that, the idea of FERPA is centered around students and student data and its protection for the students. So why aren't they getting any say in this? Why aren't we going to the students and,
because the students don't know anything.
They have no idea that this is going on, although I would argue that, anybody who was involved in this Swiki project that was a student should be outraged right now. And any student who sees their work just suddenly disappear because it violated some misinterpretation of a law sitting somewhere should be outraged by this. We should be consulting with the students before we should even be making these broad strokes and measures.
I think that's a huge point. And I think another point is, it also should have us thinking more about student-centered design. I mean, that's why Canvas, I think, has gotten so many people's imagination. LMS are not. Mm-hmm. And why aren't we thinking about our infrastructure, IT, email, all that stuff along. I mean, the idea that we're giving them a choice between Hotmail and Gmail right now in general is a false choice. Give them a choice, have them get their own email, their own domain, and we bring it in and manage that stuff. We conceptualize our IT programs all together. And if you really want to get serious about FERPA, you'll really get serious about reimagining at the very core what an IT organization does. Keep in mind that OIT at Georgia Tech, the information technology is the one who basically said to the dean, this is potentially problematic. Right. Pull this stuff off. Let's deal with it. I mean, are you kidding me? A CIO is determining this stuff about academic information and academic content? Right. That's when we got the ass driving the head. Right? We really do. The IIT is like the ass of any institution. And they're driving the brain. It's just because you got diarrhea doesn't mean...
Where are you going?
I'm hanging on every word right now.
Doesn't mean you.
So Joe Murphy had a good
question. Okay.
Joe Murphy had a good question. He said, do students really think of school web projects of having that kind of permanency? I would argue that at least in UMW Blog's case, and I would hope in more and more cases that they do, that they can believe that the work that they create in higher education can carry on with them in some form, whether or not it be supported on campus, but ways to export it, ways to be able to point back to it. There's no reason with the advances that we have in storage and technology, there's no reason that higher education can't support this. Now, maybe you have issues of scale on larger campuses, but
Penn State does it. I mean, they do have scale. I mean, this stuff has scaled.
I think that question forces students to recognize that they want to have their own permanent space.
Right.
They have it. They have the ownership of it being permanent and on their space that they control.
Right. Well, I mean, that's important. And I think the real important things is, rather than us making decisions one way or another, I mean, this is basically FERPA was a ruling that read in its most liberally and I think generatively means students need to be enabled to have control over certain data, to control who sees it. And we as institutions need to foster that space for them to control, right? And
these open
short of doing
spaces
that,
empower students to do that.
Yeah.
And that's the nut here is that, you know, these wikis, these blogs, these open spaces, they're not prohibiting students. They're not breaking the law. It's empowering the student to make decisions about the data that they create and own.
And Mark Guzdiel, who's, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Mark, and you ever listen to this, but you probably won't. But the point is this, is he brought up, like, I understand what you're doing with UMW blogs. I understand that as an argument. But what happens when students leave and they lose their UMW email and then they can't access that stuff and they want to change something?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think that's why we, on a regular basis, say change your email from your UMW to your Gmail or Hotmail, whatever you have. And if you want, delete your stuff before you go.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, we encourage them. They're going to forget their username and password to 50 other sites they created on the web, and they're going to have some mechanism to retrieve it.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to build in a mechanism moving forward that it won't just be tied to their UMW email. If there's any benefit of them having Hotmail now or Gmail linked to the university, it's that those emails are in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Like, they can always access them, so at least it solves that problem. But, I mean, if any student wanted to change something on the web on UMW blogs, they could do it by retrieving their password now for the last 2 or 3 years through their live account and could change that information. So, in fact, that question is answered to some degree.
Yeah. Not to mention the ability to export your content before you've left the university. It's not, you know, you're not putting stuff in a lockbox that you can't get back out,
Right.
you know, before you're gone. So
That's right.
It'll be interesting to see. So Georgia Tech posted this yesterday.
Yeah.
So, and they do say that it's temporary, but the question is, how temporary are we talking here? And I'm hoping, you know, if people continue to push them on this, as I hope the professors at Georgia Tech will, that they will continue to clarify their position and how they've interpreted FERPA, and hopefully some of that can be changed.
Well, there's a part of me, and I'm going to be honest here, there's a part of me that's hoping that it all goes to hell. And FERPA, it just all comes and everybody's forced to close down their systems. Because we would still get, I mean, I don't think we get fired, right?
No.
And when we could join the disconnectivist school that Brian Lamb set up, and then I could get back to blogging about movies. Because I'm tired of DS106 and the whole UMA blogs thing. I could get back to blogging what I want.
Work is hard.
And then, and then, like, do whatever. Like, people come in, I'd be like, hey, sorry, wikis, FERPA. I would love to be the one to say when faculty come in and say they want to work with me. It's like, but what about FERPA?
I'm not sure I can complete that project. The FERPA.
I actually think I'm going to take down my last post because you know what?
Huh?
We're not FERPA compliant.
Yeah. It might come back to haunt you.
We should really. I think I'm going to go take down UMW blogs just in case.
Or maybe you could password protect it. Just create a walled garden around that.
I'm just going to throw something in the Apache to prevent everyone from seeing it.
Right. All right. Well,
All
I
right.
think we've covered it enough. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks,
See
chat.
you later.